First of all, my name is Justin Birch. I'm the president of the Graduate Student Senate. Panelists will be Bernadette Stark, Director of Student Legal Services Office, Ken Reed, who is the Director of International Student and Scholar Services, and Calvin Trivedi, who's the Assistant Provost for International Programs. Just a little bit of background. We in the Graduate Student Senate, we asked both SLSO and IPO to hold this webinar to try and provide us a space to discuss a variety of issues surrounding international students, particularly the new SEVP protocols that came out recently. Please note that this is a webinar. The chat function is disabled, but if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the question and answer portion, and then we'll get those answered as best we can. We have a lot of participants. Please understand that we may not be able to get to every single question, but we'll do the very best we can with the time that we do have. But we recognize there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety among international students regarding these new rules. We don't know everything yet. I think everybody is still trying to scramble to understand these new rules and interpret them. So not every single question we're going to have an answer for at this point. But we do want to provide a space where we can give as much information as we can to talk about the background of the new rule, as well as understanding the litigation challenging it, and then also what the University of Massachusetts is currently doing, if we know right now. I don't want to talk too much because I'm not the expert on these things, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bernadette Stark. Thank you all for being here, panelists and participants. I greatly appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you, Justin. And hello, everyone, and welcome to this community conversation. First of all, I want to thank the Graduate Student Senate for quickly putting this event together. Justin, Sohini, Mariam, Laura, everyone involved. Thank you for your time on this and for inviting myself and IPO. Thank you very much to IPO also for participating on very short notice. When I was first approached about participating in a webinar or a presentation on the new SEVP rule, I didn't think that that was something that we could do yet because there's so much that we do not know. You know, how can we put together a presentation to answer questions when we don't have the answers? However, we did realize that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety and concern, understandably. And so we wanted to at least provide a forum for the conversation to happen and for us to share what we do know. So I'm going to provide you with a little bit of background on the rule, on the pending litigation, and then shift it over to Ken Reed and Calvin Trivedi regarding some updates in the higher education realm and additional information for you. So as many of you know, the COVID-19 pandemic forced many students, including international students, to shift to online or remote learning. And in on March 9th and 13th, the Department of Homeland Security, through ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, issued guidance through the Student Exchange Visitors Program, SEVP, that temporarily allowed international students to take online classes, which is a deviation from the previous rule. This was in response to the pandemic, and many colleges and universities relying on this rule constructed their programs for the fall 2020 semester to include some universities fully online, some in person, and some kind of this hybrid of online and in-person classes. However, on July 6th, the SEVP program issued guidance regarding a temporary final rule, which sounds contradictory, but under the administrative procedures, basically they're saying that they were going to implement a final rule saying that for the fall 2020 academic semester, they're going to reverse that exception. And they announced restrictions regarding the taking of online classes by international students. This rule would effectively impact F students on an F visa and on an M visa. And the rule essentially stated that universities, SCVP certified schools, of which the University of Massachusetts is one, that universities are allowed to operate under 3 types of academic models, either fully in person, fully online, or this hybrid program. And the rule had definitions of that, and I understand that Ken is going to go into some of the categories in more detail. But essentially, the rule said that international students currently residing in the United States cannot attend fully online academic programming in the fall and maintain their F1 visa status. And that if the university plans an entirely online fall semester, that students must either depart the United States or transfer to another school. It also impacts new international students that are currently abroad, that have not yet entered the United States and that cannot obtain an F1 visa or be admitted into the country without taking in-person classes or be part of a hybrid model. So if your schedule was an entirely online fall semester, that under this rule could jeopardize your F1 visa status. There's some question with respect to continuing international students who left the United States and remain abroad. And it's currently unclear whether they can study online outside the United States and remain active in the SEVIS system. The rule discussed that the campuses who are going to adopt a hybrid model must meet a new 3-part test. And a lot of you are hearing conversations around whether or not UMass is hybrid, are they online, what are they going to do to meet this? And a lot of that, as I said before, is currently unknown. However, we do know that the exceptions with this new rule do not apply to F1 students in the English language training or ESL programs. And for hybrid schools, there's a lot of work that would have to be done with reissuing I-20s for any new transfer or continuing F1 students, where the university would have to certify that the school is not operating entirely online and that the student is not taking an entirely online course load for the fall 2020 semester. As you can imagine, this has imposed quite an administrative burden on schools and many institutions across the country, and many of them have responded by filing lawsuits. You may have heard in the news on or around July 8th that Harvard and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, have filed a complaint in federal court seeking a temporary restraining order that would prohibit enforcement of the rule. A temporary restraining order or a stay is basically when someone is asking the court that a rule not be enforced until such time as the litigation process can work through the courts and they can have a full hearing on the merits. So if a stay is granted or a temporary restraining order is entered, then that would basically put a pause button on enforcement of the rule, and we would continue to operate under the COVID exemptions that were passed by SCVP in March. This lawsuit was joined by many other colleges and universities, and other college systems have filed their own lawsuits in response to this rule, the University of California system being one of them. And we just learned today that our own Attorney General, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, has also not only spoken out against the rule, but has filed a lawsuit today, and she's leading a coalition of 18 different states' attorneys general in this lawsuit, and a hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. So we will actually hopefully know more tomorrow even than we do today. So that's kind of the very quick overview of the rule. Ken's going to go into a little bit more detail on the actual impact, as well as the litigation around it. We do know that this is an incredibly unpopular move by the administration. We've learned that 1 in 5 Congress members have signed on to oppose this rule. hundreds of colleges and institutions have either signed on to litigation or are preparing amicus briefs in support of the litigation against this rule. And we are planning to have an update to this presentation. We're also going to be in close contact with the Graduate Student Senate so that an email can be sent out to international students regarding any developments with respect to the litigation. So, please keep in touch through email, and we will try to provide updates as soon as they are known. I will conclude by saying probably the most important piece of advice that I can provide to international students at this moment is do not do anything in response to the news articles or to the rule yet without consulting with either Student Legal Services Office or IPO. It's too soon to do anything. Do not terminate leases. Do not leave the country. Do not self-deport, because until more is known, it's still too early to act on this. So I will turn it over now to Ken to talk a little bit more about the rule and some advice for international students. Thank you.
Bernie, thanks very much. And actually, Kalpin, would you like to go first here, just with some updates perhaps, and then I can follow up on what Bernie was saying just a moment ago. Well, we might have lost Kalpin. I know that there's, I'm sorry for that. We might have some technical difficulties here. Kalpin is actually in London, so I know that he had some connectivity issues earlier this morning when I was on to him. So please stand by. We'll get Kalpin back. But the very first thing that I want to say before anything else is I hope everybody on this call realizes how sincerely concerned we are for you, how much, most importantly, how much support there is on this campus for each and every one of you. I can categorically tell you that this event has galvanized senior leadership, the president of the UMass system. Every single person on this campus is outraged by this, as am I. It's despicable. I'm not going to mince words here. I'll spare you my political leanings, but this is just a completely ridiculous event, and it will be fought. Going back to support, that element of support, I'm sure hopefully many of you saw the message from the IPO last week, as well as President Meehan and Chancellor Subbaswamy's messages. Messages are important. I think they're important to make a statement of support, but you also need action. And I can categorically tell you also that there is a tremendous amount of action that is going on behind the scenes. We have been working feverishly on this since Monday afternoon when this thing dropped at about 2:30. I'm very, very proud to say that in particular, we've been working with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Bernie just alluded to Maura Healey, who's the Attorney General. We're unbelievably lucky to have somebody like her representing us in this state. Her office I've worked with her office before. I spent a good part of most of all day Friday and pretty much all Saturday evening working with her office as we were gaining and putting together narratives and data and anecdotes for the lawsuit, which literally just dropped within the hour. So that's a very tangible piece. I want you to know that we are really, really contributing to what we see as a very important way to blunt this guidance and to, to make sure that we throw up a roadblock to it. The other point I want to emphasize is, it might seem a bit strange, but I want you to have hope. I want you to be very, very hopeful and positive that this guidance will go away. I cannot, at this point, see, at the very least, this guidance being revised. That's the very least is what's going to happen. My sense is that it's going to be completely put on hold, either through an injunction, which is inevitable, or it will just be rescinded altogether by SEVP, and they will revert to the spring guidance, which in other words would be a continuation of what we were doing for the spring with allowing remote instruction. I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to sound pretentious, and I also don't want to sound mysterious or speaking out of turn here, but I have very good friends and contacts in SEVP who I was in touch with over the weekend, and their agency is embarrassed by this as well. They know that they absolutely made a mess of this, and that was a mess that was made at the senior leadership areas of ICE, and I think we can all discuss political agenda and you know, conspiracies and things like that. I don't want to go there right now, but what I can tell you is the people in these agencies, they realize this is an absolute mess. They know that, and the information I've heard this weekend is that they probably aren't even in a position to legally combat this at this point. So that leads me to be very hopeful that I think within the next couple of days, I think we're going to see a very, very abrupt turnaround to this guidance. And I think that, you know, I want to remain hopeful and very optimistic, cautiously, but optimistic nevertheless, that there should be some changes coming very soon to this. I also want to say that I'm embarrassed by this. I have no other word for this. I'm embarrassed by my government that they would do something like this. It obviously has created a tremendous amount of anxiety, worry, so many things. It's so unnecessary. And I just want you to know that on behalf of all of us on the call in the institution, we feel deeply about you. We value you. And no matter what the appearance of the government or ICE or whatever bloody agency is doing these things, that does not speak for us, and it does not speak for the vast majority of Americans either. So I'm just going to categorically tell you that and say that from the bottom of my heart. So I do apologize for the anxiety you're facing. I don't know if Kalpin is back online here at all. I see his feed is there. He is good. Kalpin, could I ask you if you wouldn't mind to maybe give us an update on some of the senior administration's conversations and activities, and even including the work with the Attorney General's office and the latest news literally within the hour?
Sure, thank you. So after Ken's, I think, completely wonderful and impassioned statement, I don't know how anyone can follow up, but I think my role here is to assure everyone on this call that the university, both the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the UMass system generally, are very ready to do everything in our power to make sure that this cruel and I think unbelievably ill thought out new set of rules, the guidance that they've given us for this temporary final rule, does not affect our thousands of international students adversely. I think we all acknowledge that for the last 3 years since this administration has been in power, that there's been a near daily sort of assault on immigrants of all stripes, students, immigrant workers, DACA, asylees, refugees, you name it. And that this creates a lot of anxiety, it creates a lot of stress, it creates a lot of tension. And that really has an impact on people's ability to do the things that they have come to the United States to do, to live their lives, to seek education, to fulfill their personal and professional and career aspirations. And from the university's perspective, I think we just want to reiterate that we want to do everything in our power to help you fulfill those aspirations. And I think Bernie already said this, and I think Ken has said this, that we're studying this at a number of levels. We have been working with the UMass Office of General Counsel. We have we are taking advice from outside retained counsel. We are working with the Attorney General's office. We are extremely connected with our government relations folks. So we have been working with trying to lobby the Massachusetts congressional delegation and other elected representatives. We have been working with our professional organizations such as NAFSA, which is the Association of International Educators, the AIEA, ACE, the APLU, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, all of these industry bodies to advocate for change, to lobby the administration, and to oppose through legal action this rule, this proposed new temporary final rule. So, and beyond that, we've been taking certain steps internally as well. So I think that there is a, I think there are a lot of questions around people wanting to know, well, if we're a hybrid, does this mean, can I have an in-person class? Can I do this if I'm overseas? What accommodations will the university be making for me? And I think, it's safe to say that from the perspective of the university, once some of the dust settles around the clarity, either if, as we all hope, the rule is rescinded, as Ken alluded to, or if legal action puts a stop to the rule, or indeed in a worst case scenario, if the rule is sustained with some modifications, once we have clarity on what the final outcome is going to be, the university will develop the sorts of workarounds needed. So I think that the important thing to do is to not take any precipitate action without speaking with IPO, without speaking with student legal services. We will do what we can do and what we need to do to put in place any adjustments, any workarounds that will help our students maintain their status, to do the work that they need to do, to keep their academic progress ongoing. So I think that is a sort of to be determined space. Please don't interpret the fact that we haven't announced any specific workaround, which I know some universities have done, as a sort of complacence, or the fact that we're not looking into those things. I think that from our point of view, what some universities have announced may not be complete, may not be fully in keeping with where things will settle down. So we'll keep assessing the situation and keep updating the international community as things go on. I think it's important to note, last week on Thursday, Friday, both Ken and I, we worked with various stakeholders across campus and the Attorney General's office to prepare the briefing that has gone out, and the lawsuit was filed today. In fact, it dropped about half an hour before this meeting started. So the Attorney General is leading a coalition of 18 states, which include big university public systems, Illinois, Maryland, Connecticut, Delaware, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Virginia, and indeed the District of Columbia. So there are some large university systems and affecting hundreds of thousands of international students who are all behind this. And we've been working to get that lawsuit filed today. The preliminary hearing on that is tomorrow. We're also expecting movement in the Harvard MIT lawsuit to take place within the next 24 hours or so. So there's a lot of work going on in the background. And I think I'll just end and turn back over to Ken and Bernie again by just stressing that we will do what we need to do and whatever is in our power to make sure that there is as little disruption to international students in their ability to pursue their degrees successfully at the University of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Kalpan. I would just reiterate again something that Kalpan just alluded to and Bernie mentioned earlier. I want to explicitly clear that there is no immediate action that anybody needs to take right now. If this guidance were to go into effect, and that's frankly a giant if, I think, at this point, but if it were, even hypothetically, this would not take effect until the beginning of the spring semester, which means that our reporting obligation for CVIS and enrollment and so forth is 30 days after the semester start date. So we're talking, mid to late September would be the critical deadline when decisions would have to be made, when you know, mitigating circumstances face to face, and decisions like that, which Kalpin alluded to. We will take care of those once we know more, if we even have to do anything. So again, the sense of urgency is something I don't mean to disavow how impactful and stressful this is, but I just want to reiterate that do not take any action. Don't change, you know, housing. Don't amend your academic coursework or schedule or anything until we have a better idea about what's going to happen in the days and weeks ahead. You know, one thing I've lost track over the course of the last 7 days now of how many faculty have reached out to me offering to do anything that they possibly can, and say, you know, if I need to teach an in-person class for internationals, I don't care. I'll wear a mask. I'll do it out on the campus quad in front of in the Haggis Mall. It's flattering to know the degree of support that the IPO has received, and just people willing to roll up their sleeves and fight this and support all of you. So I'm very heartened by that. I really am.
Ken, I just want to follow up on something you just said, because we've had a couple of questions about housing. And so, because you said don't take any action with respect to your housing, you know, don't do anything based on what we know right now. And so can you answer a question related to the housing cancellation fee? So students are trying to decide whether or not to live on campus, and that deadline is,
I think it was yesterday, actually.
Was yesterday.
Yeah, I believe
and so yeah. You know, do you have any information about whether or not a cancellation fee will be imposed on students in the event that that they end up having to cancel?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you. It's a very important question. I noticed that was one that was popping up on the Q&A. So again, I would reiterate, don't change your plans based on the SEVP guidance. If you're planning to live on campus or in a campus residence, continue those plans. If in the absolute worst case scenario where the situation arose that you had to leave for whatever reason, which again, I think is unlikely, we would absolutely work with Res Life. I can't say enough good things about Residence Life as far as their flexibility and willingness and support for internationals. So we will work very closely with Res Life to make sure that any cancellation fee is taken care of. Again, though, I want to be very clear, though, that the decision has to be made based on your housing needs, right? So let's not use this situation as a scenario where you are maybe deciding on 2 different places to live this fall, and I want you to decide on campus residence life based on what your needs are, not on the SEVP guidance, if I'm making myself clear.
And Ken, can you also just clarify, what about students who live off campus and are looking to sign leases for this upcoming semester? Do we have any guidance for what they should do? And I'll follow up your answer, I think, because I have some guidance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously your expertise with leases and landlord-tenant issues, but it would be essentially the same answer. I know that this sounds ambiguous and this is a very stressful thing right now, but I'm very confident that through a combination of either revocation or litigation of this guidance, or simply UMass being able to mitigate this and to have a workaround for everybody that needs one to remain in status. I would suggest you carry on with your housing plans as if you're going to be here in the fall. And again, of course, fall semester is going to look very different, but my suggestion is that you make your housing arrangements based on your needs to be here locally, if those are your needs, and not let this SEVP guidance dictate what your housing plans will be.
I'd also just add on to that, that if you are looking, you haven't yet signed a lease and you are, your need is to be in town and you're planning to sign one, that if you reach out to the Student Legal Services Office, I can help you maybe draft a short addendum that you could offer to your landlord that says, in the event I have to leave the country, X will happen. So if you want to submit an intake to the Student Legal Services Office, I can help you prepare just a little thing that maybe you can negotiate with your landlord around, because as Ken said, you should continue to just move forward in the hopes that this is going to be resolved. So that's
Absolutely.
Yeah, go to our website and you can request services from there.
Thank you.
Just to touch on, and I know that we're not necessarily jumping into the questions now, or if we are, then I'll take the lead, but there was a question with respect to what the university is doing with respect to the litigation. I think Calvin spoke to that somewhat, but just to also be very clear, you know, the University of Massachusetts is signing on as a declarant to the action filed by the Attorney General, Maura Healey. So as Calvin said, you know, we are engaged on a variety of levels, the university is, on fighting this rule. I'm also seeing, and Ken and Calvin, please feel free to chime in on this as well. I'm seeing that there are a lot of questions with respect to CPT and OPT. And I just want to kind of address that now. Our current understanding is that the new policies are not expected to have an impact on F1 students who are in OPT, as long as the F1 student otherwise maintains lawful status. But the new policy could potentially have an impact on F1 students who are working in CPT, because CPT sometimes requires enrollment and an attendance in classes. So again, the question of whether it's hybrid, online, or otherwise comes into play. So once again, there's not a lot of guidance, because we do not know if the rule is going to be enforced or if it's going to be put on pause by the court. So again, take no action, but based on what we know so far, if you are planning on taking CPT, pay close attention to the updates, GSS emails. You can get in touch with IPO or SLSO.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that's an important point, both for curricular practical training and optional practical training. This guidance really does not immediately impact that. Potentially in the future, it could if the guidance were to hold. But the lack of clarity pre-exists and predates last week's guidance on some of the status issues related to eligibility of CPT and OPT. I am more concerned about new students that are not yet here, potentially not being able to have options like OPT or CPT once they arrive here, or at least having that authorization delayed. If you're a current student right now, and either you're currently on OPT or CPT, or you intend to apply in the next couple of months, I don't see any of this guidance impacting any of that, because again, this is based on your underlying status, which at this moment is perfectly fine. You're in good status, in F1 status, and I see no interruption in any of those plans. And an important point that none of us really mentioned initially at the beginning of the call, but this guidance pertains only to F1 visas, not J1s. So the guidance also pertains to what's called an M1 visa, which is a vocational visa. UMass does not offer M1, M as in Mike, visas. So if you're a J1 on this call, you can sit back and I don't want to say relax, that's not the right term, but you need not worry about this specific guidance affecting you in any way negatively. This only pertains to Fs. I was also looking through a lot of the Q&A, and there's so many questions there that we're not going to be able to provide you with an answer to today. We just simply can't, and I apologize for that. But in the absence of guidance and knowing next steps, it's too premature to answer a lot of the very specific questions on this call. One thing that I have seen reoccurring a couple times on the Q&A though is questions about what would ordinarily be relatively routine advising questions for the IPO, like an extension of your I-20 form or needing a new visa or travel issues. So I would just encourage you to please reach out to your IPO advisor for those sorts of questions. Those are best explained to you and advice given to you by your dedicated advisor. If you don't know who your advisor is, on our IPO homepage, there is a list of assigned IPO staff based on your college or degree program.
Thank you. I'm also seeing, Ken, a lot of questions with respect to graduate students who are ABD or who are completing their dissertation. And my understanding, and again, everyone, we're kind of figuring this out as we go. My understanding is that this should not impact those students because it's normally allowed under the terms of the F1 visa regardless. Is that yours as well, Captain and Ken?
It is, yes. Thanks, Bernie. That's a very important question. Let's just put it this way: we will make sure that it is that people are not harmed in those particular academic scenarios. The guidance, a strict interpretation of the guidance, could lead you to believe that you would be greatly at risk if you're outside the country. But I think particularly in the academic scenario where you are on continuous enrollment and finishing up thesis or dissertation work, we don't anticipate that as being an issue. Again, we want to be cautious, and we'll provide you with much more updated guidance once we have it. But the very short answer to that is we do not anticipate students in that category to be, we'll make sure that they're going to be okay.
Ken, do you want to update the room on the 699, 899 in this conjunction?
Yeah, to be honest, I could use a little help from you if you don't mind on that as well. But I think that part of that is the implication that, forgetting this guidance for a moment, any student that would be doing the dissertation thesis research in those academic course coded classifications, you're already very remote anyway. You're doing field work, you're doing research in the Amazon, you are back in, Trinity College Library, you're all over the world, literally. And essentially that does not change based on this guidance. And so if we would have the academic justification and indeed authority to classify you as doing thesis or dissertation research, and regardless of whether or not you're technically outside of the country at the moment, that situation doesn't change based on this guidance, because we have the authority as an academic institution to grant enrollment status and academic status, and in turn F1, underlying F1 immigration status based on that. So,
and we've already moved to change the designation of both 699 and 899 to be in the system as an in-person class coded going forward. So as long as you're on continuous enrollment, that will read as an in-person registration as well. So that just strengthens what you were just saying in terms of making sure that students who are at that point in their career where they're not taking courses anymore, they really should not be concerned about the impact of any new rules on that.
Absolutely, that's correct.
Ken, I saw a couple of different questions. Can you clarify, does this guidance go into effect as of the fall or not until the spring? There were something you said earlier caused some people to think it starts in the spring. And
right. So this, yes. So to be sure, this guidance would take effect for fall semester. And so there's no specific date that is given in the guidance. It just alludes to fall semester. And so where there might have been some confusion is that if we can remember way back in time, back to March, which seems like about 3 years ago, but back in March, SEVP, to their credit, were actually quite nimble and helpful in the guidance for spring semester. They confirmed remote instruction was okay. They disavowed the 5-month out-of-country rule. It was quite helpful for us, and it was very beneficial. And so I think what I said earlier, and I'm sorry for any confusion, is that it's certainly our hope, and it is sort of what we have heard through the grapevine, that SEVP will relinquish back to the spring guidance that they gave. So spring 2020 guidance that is, in other words, a continuation of what's been going on since spring. That's certainly our hope, and it's a bit of our intuition as well. But to be clear, again, to confirm, this terrible guidance would, if it were to take effect, would take effect fall semester. And I should say too, that would not include summer session. So again, the only regulatory action that we would have to start working towards based on this guidance would be 30 days after the fall semester start date. So again, 23rd approximately of September. So we've got time, and I want to emphasize that point yet again.
And by which point we would have the opportunity and the time to work individually with students needing any sort of workaround or what we needed to put in place if litigation did not strike this down.
That's it.
So just to follow up, I saw a couple of questions in Q&A, which is thinking about continuing students who are not right now in the country and what the impact on them might be. And relatedly, what are your recommendations about traveling at this point in time?
So a couple things on that. Again, I think it's premature. We do need to wait and see for final either revocation or amendment of the guidance or whatever litigation might come about of this. A strict interpretation of this guidance that would take effect in the fall would arguably disproportionately affect students currently outside the US, because again, a strict reading of this interpretation says that since we are considered a hybrid institution and not an online only for the fall, that you cannot maintain immigration status if you're out of the country attending a hybrid university. So we're not 100% online, we're hybrid, so thus if you're outside the US, you can't maintain F1 status. Now, with that said, I want to be very clear and I want to caution people for over-interpreting that. Because again, first of all, we have several months to mitigate this. As far as travel and reentry, I'm glad to say that literally, we've had a few students that have been able just within the past week to re-enter the United States, even with this guidance going on. In fact, we just had a student that arrived this morning from Delhi. We were tracking him. We were in touch with him throughout. And it took him about 20 seconds to get through JFK immigration today. And so that gives me some hope as well that if you have a valid visa, you have support from your institution, you're going to be able to travel as needed with your underlying status. I want to table, Sohini, I want to table that question. It's a super important question, but I want to table it because I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves about the implications of if we had to terminate status and if you're outside the US or, can you get to the US or not. I think we want to hold off and be very careful not to unduly panic about that. With that said, I think it's part of the reprehensible guidance that we got to imply that students in that situation or scenario would have to have their status canceled. And that's ridiculous. And so we're going to fight that, of course. One other thing this seems completely counterintuitive, but whatever the guidance is, whatever your immigration status is, wherever you are in the world, nothing related to this guidance or even pre-existing guidance prohibits you from being enrolled and working remotely on your educational degree program. Whether or not you have status or your status gets terminated, if you're overseas and you're otherwise plugged in and working remotely, that's not going to change. And so it's an important point, but in other words, you don't need F1 immigration status if you're outside the US to maintain enrollment, to begin and matriculate in the fall if you're a new student. So that's an important point that I want to make very clear as well. I think the implication of this is that if you don't have status, you just simply can't study. And that's not true.
I think also a technical clarification, perhaps some folks are asking on the Q&A whether UMass is considered hybrid or online.
Yeah.
And if you could speak to that a bit.
I can. If you will indulge me here just for a moment, I'm going to do a quick screen share. I don't want to bore you with all of this, but can you see that now? Is that being shared? This is the actual SEVP guidance. It's horribly written. If any of you are political science or public policy majors out there, I can talk with you all day as a fellow political scientist about how terrible this public policy is. But this is the guidance, however poorly written and conceived. And I highlighted a couple things here. And so SEVP very randomly and arbitrarily lumped us as all institutions into three general buckets. If you see number one here, schools operating entirely online. And so that is the first thing that caused a lot of panic, that if the universities such as Harvard or the Cal State system that very early on declared they were going 100% online this fall, that opened up the very serious question about students that are in the United States not being allowed to do that or maintain status because you're not technically allowed to be online. If your institution is online, you thus should not be allowed to continue F1 status. So that's it's not even a definition, but that's the number one there, alludes to online institutions. Number two on there, which is a very, very rare institution, but there are some, at least they're trying to bluster their way through and claim this, but a normal in-person class environment. So in other words, number two would indicate any school that is planning to just simply be 100% back to normal, like nothing's happening and there's no such thing as COVID. Maybe Trump University would take on that stand. I don't know, but certainly.
I believe Georgia Tech has already announced that they could do that.
I suppose I should be careful because there are institutions that are, full steam ahead. But if you are, at an institution that is full steam ahead and completely back to normal in quotes, then there are no issues related to this guidance because the underlying F1 regulations continue. So Heaney, to your point, number three there gives the SEVP guidance there alludes to what they now consider a hybrid model, and that is a mixture of online and in-person classes. And that is obviously what UMass Amherst is doing for the fall semester. And if you read more of that sentence in there, it alludes to the guidance that it says there will be allowed to take more than one class or 3 credit hours online. That's a very broad definition. It's terribly defined. It's not defined, but I would also argue that that gives us a lot of leeway and discretion on how we will be able to mitigate this if we even have to. So the fact that it's very poorly defined and very poorly written, in an ironic sort of way, I suppose, gives us, I think, more ammunition to be able to beat this.
I have a quick question.
Please.
Yeah, if that's okay. So I'm thinking about students who perhaps have other identities, and I'm talking as a Muslim, and I'm also talking as somebody who came from Kenya. We have countries that have been targeted before, and we also have students who are coming from those countries who've been targeted before by immigration. So what could this have further damage on them entering the country if they want to? Because I think that's also the component that we have to be careful in looking at. Because for instance, if a student is coming from Iran or is coming from, maybe Kenya where I grew up, they're already facing other hurdles in terms of their immigration status. So could this further cause more damage for them?
I think it's always going to be hard to quantify that, but I think your point is very, very well taken, because let's be completely honest, I think that there's a discrepancy and a bias that's built into this immigration system, particularly under this current administration. And we see that in adjudications of immigration benefits, and we also see that at the front lines of the customs and border protection officers at the airports or the border crossings as well. So what we will do, and will continue to do, because we do this already, particularly for students that feel less safe, less secure, or perhaps more targeted, we will work directly with them. We'll make sure that you have a number 24/7, that you'll have a travel letter for your back pocket, even though that has nothing to do with regulation, but we will do that. And we've done that in particular with our Iranian community over the past couple of years for unfortunately obvious reasons. And we would do that to absolutely any student that would feel unsafe and perhaps unduly targeted. I think, as add on to that point, the bottom line is that it's going to come down to what is your immigration status, right? So if you have maintained your status, you have had no past incidents in your immigration record, you have evidence of enrollment, of all of your other academic credentials. In theory, that should not be a scenario that would not be, that would be something that would prohibit you from entering or getting another visa renewed or what have you. But again, I'll leave it at that. But my point being is that the IPO is going to 100% support you in every possible way that we can and will.
Ken and maybe Pamela, watching the time and want to make sure that we get this section covered prior to running out of time. And, if you, as the office primarily supporting international students with a lot of these issues, do you have any tips on how students can kind of cope with the uncertainty going on at this time? That would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. It's an important question. And I'd really like to bring in my colleague, Pamela Dutta here, who's on the call as well. And, I want to underscore the fact that even though we're in the middle of all this regulatory angst and, so much of our mission in the office, for better or worse, has to do with immigration regulation and compliance, we also work very closely across campus with stakeholders, whether it be CCPH or the dean's offices, or a variety of other areas too that for programming, for outreach. And I want to make it very clear that we intend, especially even now that we're in this kind of remote world for the time being, we want to keep in touch with you. We want to engage with you. We want to continue dialogue, whether it be for personal reasons or other reasons, or just, let's consider the fact that we're all here together and we're here to support you. So I think that that's just incredibly important. We need to keep doing that for all of you. Pamela, you would be able to explain that much better than I just did. But if you could please talk about some of the great work that you have always done and continue to do with our outreach and programming, that would be great.
Thanks, Ken. First of all, hello, everybody, near and far. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am sorry that we have to have this conversation today, but nevertheless, Ken was accurate. What I can help you best with is trying to keep our students feel connected and that we are part of the community and that we are looking out for you. I work closely with Sohini from the Graduate Student Senate to provide some virtual programming this summer. And although it's a very small little piece of how we can help, I just hope that we can provide you with opportunities to see each other and to see us and to know that you are not alone. So if there's ever a reason of concern, or if you're worried, or if you just need help or a resource, I'm going to always say, please reach out. Please email me directly, and I will do my best to help you or direct you in the right place. So most importantly, take care of yourselves. And just as you are scared, I am scared, I am unsure. We're learning to do our jobs very differently. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that things will turn out properly. Thank you.
I did want to jump in. Thank you, Pamela. And again, I see two other questions that are coming up, which we might have some time just before we leave to speak about. The first is, what is the relationship, if anything at all, between the CEFB guidance and assistantships? Let's say in the case that students do have to leave the country, does this affect assistantships? Is there any relationship between, your immigration status and your ability to perform your TA-ship or RA-ship?
It's unclear, Sohini, at this time. We're not going to be able to have an answer for you. It's certainly our assumption and, of course, our hope that if you are overseas with an assistantship and it's otherwise an appropriate assistantship and your duties can be done remotely, that will continue. That's our working assumption. It's been our assumption prior to the guidance as well. The guidance obviously complicates that a little bit regarding some of these issues regarding status if you're outside the country, since we're hybrid. So unfortunately, we can't 100% answer that right now, but again, it's our working assumption that we will make that happen in any way we can, and might have to mitigate based on face-to-face or a different course registration number or whatever. We're gonna do everything we can to make that happen. There, I would just say, sorry, final thing, it's not really necessarily an immigration issue per se. There could also be some foreign taxation or labor considerations for the other countries, not the US. And so that complicates things maybe a bit more in the taxation labor area that's out of our purview. But again, with that said, we're going to be continuing with a hopeful working assumption that that's going to continue for the fall.
Thanks, Ken. And the other question I think I saw a lot of was, you know, given that we're talking about and UMass is thinking about workarounds, courses, you know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but the SFP guidance seems to suggest that if the school is forced to go online, let's say if there's another outbreak, then even in that case, students will have to either leave the country or find another institution. So what are your thoughts on that? I know a lot of people are trying to figure out, you know, if we've come up with a solution now, but then what after? And I'm not saying you have the answer, but if, you know, anything.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the most particularly cruel elements to this ridiculous guidance is that, you know, that just flies in the face of all logic or public health guidance or anything. And so, you know, I think that some of the things that we've been discussing with colleagues would be that, you know, we have a few tools in our arsenal here that we could employ, you know, medical reduced course load, which is in current regulation. We could, you know, we've got a few tricks up our sleeve, I think, let's put it that way. If I shouldn't have said that since we're getting recorded, but we're going to make sure that you're looked after, bottom line, and that if God forbid things go from bad to worse in the fall with the pandemic, we're not going to throw you out into the curb and stick you on a bus to the airport. That's not going to happen. It's impossible, and we would never let it happen. And so, you know, let's see what the guidance says. If we can hopefully go back to the spring guidance, which was helpful. The only thing that we had to do was simply just update SEVP with our revised academic course plan, given the fact that we were transitioning to remote. And so if we can hopefully go back to that logical guidance from the spring, then I would see that would be the answer to your question, that we would just simply say, okay, we've had to transition, unfortunately, so everybody maintains their underlying status and there's no change to your ability to remain in the United States and to continue your studies.
I'm seeing a lot of the same question over and over again, and I think that you've answered it, but I think maybe just asking it very directly is a good thing. So does UMass have any plans to create an in-person course that students can register for in the event this guidance continues to be the law of the land?
If it needs to be done, it will be done. Kalpan, I think, said it very well a few minutes ago that, you know, we need to take a bit more of a wait and see attitude about this. And if this guidance continues, which again, that's my personal opinion that it won't, then we'll find a way to make this happen. And in this guidance, again, how poorly it's written, there's no definition about what constitutes face-to-face. Is it once a semester? Is it, you know, online face-to-face rather than, you know, what is face-to-face? The assumption would be that you'd have to sit in a classroom, but there's a small animal that just, I saw, right? Sorry that the public didn't see that, but there was a dog here. It was okay, but most importantly, Raquel is okay. But sorry, yeah, we're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen however that might look. It would be done, of course, with health protocols in mind, but simply put, we'll make it happen because if we have...
I'm going to jump in here, Ken. As the Chancellor's email last week made it clear, the Provost and Deans are already having these conversations about what needs to happen if additional in-person sections need to be laid on for students who need to be kept in status. So, you know, yes is the short answer. So, or was it Raquel who brought that last question? But yes. I mean, the Chancellor said as much last week.
Right.
I couldn't agree more with the sentiments of the Chancellor's letter and also the language in the Harvard and MIT complaint with respect to international students being a very crucial, important part of the fabric of what makes our UMass community great. So, you know, we're all going, trying to do as much as we can. We want to keep everyone as informed as possible. I also recognize that some of the questions that were coming up on the Q&A were questions that were actually answered earlier on in the presentation. So there are plans to post this recording. I know that the SLSO will have a link to this presentation on their website. Maybe some of the offices will as well. But check back in a day or two. This presentation will be posted, and some of the questions that have come up in the last several minutes will be answered in the presentation. So try to view it again, encourage friends to view it. And as I stated previously, we anticipate having another update either tomorrow or the day after, after the hearing on the temporary restraining order that's going to be occurring tomorrow.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank all of the participants, graduate students, undergraduate students, people who are interested in this, from joining in and asking questions. I just want to say that I pushed very hard for this to happen, even though we knew that all of the questions wouldn't be able to get answered. But I felt like that it was best for us to show our support to our international student community and to get out as many answers as we possibly can, knowing that not all of the answers are going to be able all the questions are going to be able to be answered right now. But I want to say that, at least from the Graduate Student Senate perspective, and I know also from IPO, from SLSO, we're working on this on a daily basis. We're having daily meetings on this, and we will continue to be there to give you what answers we have when we have them as quickly as we possibly can. I'm hoping that this will get reversed in the next day or two. If it's not, we will absolutely continue to advocate for courses, or however it is that we need to organize the structure in the fall to make sure that international students stay on campus. That's what the GSS will do, and that's what I've heard both IPO and SLSO will do as well. Does anybody have any final comments before? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Once again, Bernadette, Ken, Pamela, Calpin, Raquel, and all the GSS folks for putting this together. I really do appreciate it under very interesting circumstances. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Take care of yourselves, everyone.